operational excellence really looks like is that in a nutshell. It's no process is ever really done.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Process Lab. I'm your host, Sam Drawshak, and today I'm happy to be joined by Nick Schwarzrock. Hey, Nick.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here, Sam.
Absolutely. So as you know, this is a show where we talk about process from various angles and how it impacts operations, how it impacts our lives in general. So I'm really happy to have Nick on the show today, and I'll give a quick intro on Nick. Nick is a dedicated husband, father, and serial entrepreneur with a remarkable passion for advancing medical devices, medtech, and telehealth. He has over 20 years of experience in the med device industry, and Nick has worked alongside some of the brightest minds, gained incredible insights, and celebrated countless victories. Throughout his career, Nick has been involved in more than $2.4 billion worth of mergers, acquisitions, and layered integrations, transforming companies and reshaping the industry landscape. So with that experience, Nick, I'm sure you have tons to share. But what I wanted to know is give us a little more context about your serial entrepreneurial path and like what that means for you and what businesses you're working on. And let's just start the conversation there.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the warm introduction. I'm really excited to be here. Being a serial entrepreneur is, I think, a curse in most aspects because starting businesses successfully and repeatedly is difficult, and you're sort of playing with the odds stacked against you. But I really have found my passion in building and assembling new businesses, new ideas, and really being creative and fostering innovation in all aspects of a business environment. And I've just found that for me to be able to do those things and be able to be as creative and innovative as I want to be, it really the only place to do that is in a new business entrepreneurial environment, because when you get into these larger businesses, there's just so much static that's that is existing and is foundational, that it driving significant change is very, very difficult. And your podcast kind of talks about a lot of that. And when you have a business that has structural issues and you're trying to make changes for the better, it's that same difficulty that you run into. So I like to build from the ground up because it gives me an opportunity to build it the way that I want to build it, and really drive innovation and successive changes that is really difficult when you get larger, and it's just harder to turn the ship.
Yeah, that's great context, and I totally agree. I think one of the best parts of big entrepreneurship, and obviously there's a lot of headaches with entrepreneurship, but the best part is it's an open canvas. Like you mentioned, you get an open playing field, and I think that's the exciting part. And I know we talked briefly before the show, the biggest thing, and we talk about process and startups. What has your process been like in starting a new company, or finding that you have to kind of have that infrastructure to be successful? Because a lot of times people don't understand that even when you're an entrepreneur and you're being creative and you can be very flexible, you can't get very far unless you have some basic infrastructure. So I'd love to know kind of your experience with that and how that's been in your companies. And if you have any guidance there, you can talk to.
Yeah, no, good question. And, I was smiling because some of your previous guests that I watched when I was preparing for your podcast, a lot of people talk about several of these, sort of issues that come up when you're starting new businesses and foundational aspects of it. And I agree with some of them, so I'm sort of echoing some of the things that some of your previous guests have said. But I think it's important to have core values and to kind of have a game plan and on what you want to do. And to me, the definition of core values is something that you prioritize ahead of the revenue line. That's how you know it's a core value. And that's one of my passion projects that I sort of like to talk about and speak to entrepreneurs about, to help them sort of prioritize those core values in foundation. And then, I've also learned a lot of my examples the hard way. by making mistakes and learning through those mistakes. And I've worked in organizations that were growing very quickly and got large enough to, say the $40 million in annualized revenue without strong or any real operational excellence or any ops department. And it's just so debilitating that I learned from those experiences that you have to build your infrastructure operationally. And to me, in today's age of business, operations and your digital infrastructure are kind of synonymous. They should be connected at the hip because one of the most amazing things that I've seen over the last, I don't know, 10 years or so is the sophistication and the software data systems that are available to small businesses at affordable rates has just changed the ballgame. For example, we run NetSuite in my organizations as an ERP system, and I couldn't run a successful business today operationally without some type of system like that. And everybody's got sort of their favorite iteration of an ERP system that they can use and then bolt everything else into it through APIs.
Yeah, for sure. And I like a lot of the things you said there in that answer, starting with values first. A lot of times when you ask a question about process, people don't have that first instinct to say, well, first, it's got to be values. But I wanted to comment on that because in reality, you can't have a process that works properly if you can't define the value objective of a process. And especially when you're talking about a company, like you said, setting the values first is your compass. It's your North Star. You can't have strong operations if you haven't defined what value your company or your companies are supposed to be making. So I just wanted to echo that because I think it's a really important point for people to internalize what you said about values first and then operations. And then the second part of that answer, which I think is fascinating the way you articulated it, is that process and operations is almost synonymous for you with a lot of these new digital tools and like the digital IT infrastructure. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And I just wanted to emphasize that because today, it doesn't matter what company you're in. If you want to drive down your cost of operations, you have to automate. And it doesn't matter, like you said, if you're a small business or you're in the Fortune 10, because everyone can have software automation now. And I think that's like a really big trend that you pointed out that's different than it was even 10 years ago, right? Where you could be a small company and still get away with doing things on paper, mashing things through the grinder, but not anymore. If you want to have your cost of operations be competitive, you've got to leverage software automation. So in a way, even for the smallest companies, basic operations and digital operations, they really have to come together. So I just wanted to, because you just dropped a lot of knowledge there, and I just wanted to bring up a few points. And you push a lot of that in your companies early, it sounds like.
Yes, and when you were commenting, I was smiling because a quote popped into my head, and it's from a guy who built and ran the SEAL team training for the Navy SEALs, and his quote is that culture eats strategy for breakfast every day, and if you don't start with culture and those core values, you really have nothing. But you can strategize and process all you want, and it's going to tumble to the ground because you don't have your core values and your culture aligned. So that's what I was kind of smiling about that. But yeah, and when you were talking, one of the things that resonated for me when you were responding was the comment about the software, but also effectiveness. To me, I don't know that you can be effective anymore with processes without software, semi-customized or fully customized software in your operations department. The ability to be effective drops considerably without that.
Yeah, and it is something really important to note because, like you said, it's to the point where it's so ubiquitous or it's so widespread, the use of software to automate basic operations and administrative processes. I just don't think you can even get out the gate competitively anymore if you're not doing it. So I'd be interested in your experience with starting new companies over the last, however many years. how do you encourage that in people? Is that just sort of a given now? Or when you get, do you have to go in and say, hey guys, like I expect some basic level of automation or software usage. Like, what does that look like for you in your context?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it starts foundationally like everything does, and it starts with your hiring. Who are the people that you're picking? And I know that, everybody wants, I think a lot of businesses want those A players, but I think that it starts with your culture, it starts with your core values, then hiring the right people, and then, like some of your guests have talked about, everybody needs to know what direction they're walking in and what the goal is. And if you don't have that spread across your organization, if everybody doesn't know what's the 1 year goal, what's the 5 year goal, what's the 10 year goal, you're never going to get there, with anything. And if you look at business, some of the great leaders of our time, all of them have had that hallmark of setting goals, short-term, long-term, or short-term, midterm, and long-term goals, and really beating their drum to that, to those goals, and making it that everyone from the janitor to the CEO, top down and bottom up, they have to know what those goals are and those objectives, and how you're going to get to them.
Yeah. And today there's a lot of different ways, and I totally agree. And there's a lot of different ways and tools and mechanisms that people use to promote that transparency and that understanding of the goals by everyone. So I'd love to know what you use maybe in some of your companies. Are you using like a proven methodology? Is it something that you drive yourself? How does everyone know what those objectives are, those goals are? Like how do you spread that process wise within your companies?
So again, foundationally, I think it starts with core values, and then mission and vision statement, and then really having a consolidated direction on where you're trying to go, and making it simple, stupid to understand, and don't get distracted or lost with shiny objects that come up along the road. This opportunity, let's deviate a little bit, let's widen our scope. All of these things are things that happen to every entrepreneur, every successful business, where they're doing something really well and somebody comes and says, hey, can you do X? And X is a little bit outside of what your specialty is, and it looks good, looks profitable. The grass is always greener on the other side. Let's broaden our scope a little bit. And it's like veering off the road on the highway. Once you hit the grass, you're pulled off into the median, or into the ditch. And I think every entrepreneur who's tried to start their business, or tried to scale a business, has seen this happen. And some of them, certainly a lot of the failures, I bet that's part of what happened, is that they got sidetracked on a boondoggle. And then some of the successful ones, they probably pulled out. They probably made the mistake and then realized it was a mistake, and pulled out. I know I've done it before, where something looked really attractive. We invested way too much time and money into it, and realized it wasn't part of our core focus, and lost a bunch of time and money. So I think discipline is probably the short answer to your question. Of make sure that communication is key, have those basic foundations, and then have the discipline to say no when a bright shiny object pops up that tries to distract you and your company from doing what you guys are set out to do, and what you're experts at.
Yeah, and I like that. And the stopping part is so critical, and something I always like to just bring attention to, because it's the same thing, of a company is like a big project in some ways, right? And a lot of times project work, I'm just making this parallel because people do not terminate projects enough. They don't terminate startups enough. And it's like you said, part of having a core mission, people don't usually associate it with, well, hey, a core value stream or a more mission statement or vision statement helps me know when to quit. But really, I think it's very insightful. And I think more people need that, not only in just their companies broadly, but in their project work generally. Because if you let it go too far, or you have to let it go far because your original objective is impossible, it's better to shut down sometimes and terminate and save, don't honor the sunk cost versus pushing forward and then creating something nonsensical or creating a business that's not viable and just losing you money. So I definitely think that's an important thing to remember for people. But in terms of the mechanisms you use, I wanted to come back to also, you talked about having those statements, staying focused, staying disciplined. Is this something that you get together with like a group of directors? Like, is it like a quarterly thing? Is it a town hall meeting thing? What do you use for your process to kind of keep everyone aligned to that? Because I know when you're in the heat of it, it can be very easy to get distracted, especially in these entrepreneurial settings.
So yeah, I mean, when you're originally setting out to do this, it's, if you're by yourself, you got to sit down and do it by yourself. But I've been fortunate enough where, I usually start with a team. And for example, with the company that I'm working on right now, we literally sat down as a leadership team and said, okay, what do we think our core values are? And then let's sit down and write a mission and vision statement. And then let's literally plot out the first 5 years of what are we going to do? When are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? And use that as a roadmap. And we keep going back to it. And, back to I think what you're really saying was the courage to quit, right? When you've got a project or something that you realize is in the wrong thing. It's like so many things in business. It takes courage and it takes fortitude and it takes discipline to quit, to close the door. If you've got an employee who's not the right employee, either they're not in the right seat or they're not in the right company, you need the courage to say, hey, do we need you in a different role or do we need you in a different company? And the sooner you make those tough decisions, the more successful that you will be. And it definitely takes courage. And I think a lot of business people, not just entrepreneurs, suffer from that sunk cost fallacy that you were sort of alluding to. And it's something that, I encourage all of my managers to talk about what are our costs going forward and what do we think the outcome is, not how much have we spent. Because when people start looking backwards at how much they've spent, they get afraid about making simple decisions that a child could know was the right decision, because you get that sunk cost fallacy where you're thinking about the money you've invested rather than what you should be thinking of, that money's already gone.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And then just to bring it a little bit back around to the process and operations, when you know things are going wrong, and like you said, you're talking to your managers, you try to keep focus. What tools or what kind of actions do you take when you feel like, hey, operations are getting bogged down, we're burning too much money, costs are getting too high? I'd love to just know sort of your experience in identifying those situations and saying, this isn't going to work, or if it is going to work, here's who I need to hire, who's who I need to fire. Like, how do I turn an operation around, basically?
Great question. And the answer I think loops a little bit back to when you're setting up processes and how you're managing processes, and sort of back to my philosophy that I touched on a little bit about innovation in everything that you do. And so, for example, yesterday I was on a call where we were talking about a process flow, and we were sort of joking about the fact that what version of the process is this, because we've been refining it and refining it and refining it, because we keep finding areas of opportunity. And I think that what operational excellence really looks like is that in a nutshell. It's no process is ever really done. And I'll steal, sort of this idea from Jim Collins of Good to Great, right? Is the enemy of great is good, right? Or good enough. And I think that sort of is what I'm talking about with this process concept of, if your business is truly growing and innovating like a successful business usually is, I'm always changing processes and refining them. Whenever we find that there's a process that could be better, we take the time to stop and make it better. And we try and get everybody from the bottom to the top to the bottom who's involved in those processes in on that brainstorming meeting, so that we can make the changes that we need. Because you'll be stunned at the stuff that you miss when you're at one end of the process versus the other. And they're really simple things where a lot of times you can cut. You can cut stuff out of the process, and you can make it simpler. And I'll steal from Elon Musk, where he talks about sort of process and manufacturing, but you keep cutting until you have to put stuff back in because you've cut too much. Same type of concept here with the processes is refine it, cut it until you maybe go too far, and then you add stuff back in, but you're always iterating.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of great wisdom in that answer. I love a lot of the things you said, especially the first part about iteration. You're like a process expert when you talk about it. And I didn't know that was a Jim Collins quote, but in the process improvement world, there's a very similar quote that's just perfection is the enemy of greatness. And it's like you said, right? It's if you're focused on making it, you can make something too good in process. And I think that's really important for everyone listening to internalize, because generally it's like Nick is saying, processes change every day. They're living and they change continuously. You're never going to, even if you put all the time and money and effort in the world, you're never going to fix a process into a perfect or even a super great state, because it's going to need to change the next day and the next month. So a lot of what, and this is in my experience in entrepreneurial ventures, sounds like you have the same. It's, you've got to be willing to keep rolling forward and keep moving. Prioritize action over prioritizing planning and thinking, because life is iterative. And it's like you said, you got to get it out there and you got to just keep doing it. And then the other thing that you talked about in that, which I think is really fascinating, the way you described it, is getting all the stakeholders in the room. And this is actually a very formal thing in process improvement, especially in lean. It's called Kaizen events. And the idea is what you just said, which is instead of like all the managers or the smartest people in the building trying to think about what the process is and should be, you're way better getting everyone who's in the process today in there, having them talk, having them see it, and then knocking it out together, and then going to the next iteration. All the stakeholders who you need to make a decision are in the room at the same time. So I just wanted to highlight back to you, I think it's interesting you described it that way, because people in the process world have been working on that for a long time and trying to help people see that. So I think it's cool that you got to that, in your businesses and intuitively, because if you want to talk about iterating quickly, get the people in the room. It's something that we talk about on this podcast a lot, right? Get the people who are in it in the room and have everyone make a co-decision, make a strong one, and then run with it. And if it's right, it's right. And if it's wrong, you'll fix it. And that's okay. So, I like a lot of how you're thinking about it. And I'm not surprised that you've had success with that kind of mentality in your companies, because that's a lot of what process people are hired to go in and teach people. It's very hard sometimes for people to let go of control, let go of not being perfect, bring everyone into the conversation. So it sounds like you've got a lot of really good foundation stuff going on in your company from a process perspective already.
Thank you. I think some of this stuff is common sense, but I agree. And I agree with your comments about, I think the quote comes out of the Army originally, that a good plan today is better than the perfect plan tomorrow. And I firmly believe that. And don't be afraid to iterate and, make it good over time, make it great over time.
Yeah, iteration is so key, especially now. Life is going a lot faster. And like you said, we've gone through this software revolution in a way where if you want to automate and you want to scale and you want to get your businesses out the door and really get them growing, there's never going to be a stable state. Like, you're changing so fast. And it's like you said, I'm sure that you're somebody as a serial entrepreneur, none of your business can be perfect right at any given time. Like, they're all just sort of works in motion, I would assume, especially if you're juggling multiple at a time.
Yeah. And, I think that change is one of the powers of entrepreneurialism and small businesses. It's one of the things that advantages that they have over the big companies. And so I think that you should utilize that advantage. And, the other thing about processes and process management that I would say is, when you build a process, I think especially in small businesses, where you're usually more cash constrained than large Fortune 500 companies, run your process a little bit and do some of these iterations before you spend money on customizing your software to work with the process that you've built, because you will learn a ton, especially if you're listening to the people who are running those processes day to day. Once they've run it a few dozen times, they're going to know all the problems, or 90% of the problems that you overlooked the first time, and you can fix all that stuff before you start spending money on unnecessary programming that you're going to end up scrapping anyway. So I think, running stuff and then building your software, once you've got it 80-90% where you really think it's going to be built to last, then spend your money to make your data systems be the most efficient that they can with running that system, as long as you can run it mostly with what you've already got.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so you've heard it here, folks. And then Nick's been sharing a ton of great information about how you start successful businesses. I think the foundations are all there, and then how you run processes and how you be iterative about it, right? I think that's the biggest takeaway here from the end of the episode, which is iteration is key. Change is key. Being flexible to change is a big deal in starting successful businesses. With all that, Nick, do you have any closing thoughts for the audience or anything you'd like to share from your side before we wrap up today?
Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, Sam. It was great to be on your podcast. I hope that your listeners took some value away from some of my commentary and our conversation. If anybody would like to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn, and you can also reach me at my company, advancedrecover.com.
Awesome. All right. Thanks a bunch for your time. Thanks for all of you tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time on the Process Lab.